We were at a friend's housewarming when my fiancée's phone buzzed. Message read, "Miss you already. Last night was perfect." When she saw what I read, the night started like 100 others we'd spent together. Music, laughter, the hum of conversations in a crowded living room where everyone seemed a little too proud of how far they'd come in life. Isabel and I arrived late to Harper's housewarming party, arms full of wine and dessert, trying to look like the couple everyone expected us to be. We were supposed to be the stable ones, the engaged pair people teased about being next down the aisle. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. She smiled easily, the kind of smile that made people trust her. I'd seen that smile turn whole rooms in her favor. But that night, something about it felt different. She laughed louder than usual, touched arms that weren't mine, and kept wandering to the patio with her phone in hand. When I caught her glancing at the screen mid-conversation, I brushed it off as work. She was always busy, always checking something. Still, there was something rehearsed in the way she kissed my cheek when she noticed me watching. I tried to stay calm. I talked to Harper's husband about real estate, nodded at jokes I didn't hear, and kept refilling my drink just to have something to do. But my eyes followed Isabel. Every few minutes, she'd slip away again, pretending to take calls or refresh her makeup. When she disappeared for the third time, I found myself walking toward the kitchen without even deciding to. Her phone was on the counter beside an empty wine glass, its screen lighting up just as I passed. I didn't mean to look, but my name wasn't on that screen. The preview of the message was clear enough to burn itself into my memory. "Miss you already. Last night was perfect." It felt like my body forgot how to breathe. For a moment, I thought maybe it was some joke, maybe someone teasing her. But the timestamp said 11:42 p.m., the same night she'd told me she was helping her sister move furniture. I picked up the phone without realizing it. My thumb hovered over the notification, but before I could open it, I heard footsteps. She walked in, still laughing about something someone had said, but her expression dropped the instant she saw what I was holding. The laughter died mid-step. She froze, her body turning rigid. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her and then back at the screen. The tension thickened until the sound of people talking in the living room felt distant, like it belonged to another world. She tried to speak, but nothing coherent came out. I put the phone down slowly, letting her see that I wasn't angry. Not yet, at least. That scared her more than shouting ever could. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the phone, flipping it face down as though the message might vanish. She muttered something about a joke from a client, but the story didn't even make sense. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I told her we needed to leave. She whispered that I was embarrassing her. That was enough. I walked out without another word. Outside, the night air felt heavy. The sound of people still laughing behind me was surreal. It was like leaving a play mid-scene, realizing the audience hadn't noticed the actors bleeding. I waited near the car for a while, thinking she'd follow. When she didn't, I got in and drove off. The roads were empty, streetlights blurring past while my mind replayed the message over and over. Halfway home, my phone buzzed, 7 missed calls from Isabel. I ignored them all. Then came the texts, a chain of desperate explanations. She claimed it was nothing, said she'd explain later. I didn't respond. I pulled into the apartment garage and sat there in silence, the engine still running. I didn't feel angry yet, just cold. That kind of silence that happens before a storm decides where to land. I turned off the car and tried to go upstairs, but my curiosity turned into a kind of gravity, pulling me back. Something made me drive again, nowhere in particular, just away from the apartment, down the long stretch of road that led to the city's downtown hotels. It was irrational, but so was everything about that moment. And that's when I saw it. Her car, parked outside a hotel with its headlights off, half hidden behind another vehicle. I stopped across the street, my hands gripping the wheel. I wanted to believe it wasn't hers, but the dent near the backlight was unmistakable. The parking ticket on the windshield read 9:13 p.m. the night before, the same night of the text. I sat there for almost 10 minutes, just staring at the building. People came and went through the glass doors, couples mostly. I didn't see her come out. My stomach felt hollow. I took a photo of the car and the ticket, proof I didn't even know what I'd do with. Then I drove home again, the silence in the car now deafening. By the time I reached the apartment, the calls had stopped. Only one message waited at the top of the screen. "Please talk to me. It's not what you think." I didn't answer. I left the lights off and went to bed still in my clothes, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The next morning, the sound of knocking dragged me out of half-sleep. It was her voice outside the door, trying to sound calm but breaking mid-sentence. She kept saying she could explain. I opened the door just long enough to see her standing there, hair unbrushed, face pale. She looked nothing like the confident woman from the night before. I asked her if she stayed at the hotel. She said no. She swore she'd gone to a friend's place. I asked her to tell me the friend's name. She hesitated too long. Then she said she couldn't remember the exact address. That was enough for me to close the door again. She stayed there for a while, knocking and pleading until her voice turned hoarse. Eventually, the sound faded. When I finally looked through the peephole, she was gone. For the rest of the day, I didn't move much. I sat at the table, staring at her half-empty mug still in the sink from that morning. Everything around me felt staged, like my apartment had become a museum of our life together. Every photo, every shared item, suddenly looked like a prop from a story that had never been real. By evening, the numbness started to wear off. It turned into something sharper, colder. I realized I couldn't just sit there waiting for her version of events. If she was lying, I needed to see it with my own eyes. I still didn't know what exactly I'd do, but I knew the next time I looked at her, I wanted to already know the truth. That's when I decided I wouldn't confront her through messages or calls anymore. The next time we talked, she'd be forced to choose between honesty and exposure. The message from the night before wasn't going away. Neither was the image of her car outside that hotel. Both were burned into me like scars that hadn't formed yet, but I knew they would. That night, I turned off my phone and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Somewhere out there, she was probably rewriting the story in her head, planning what to say next. I wasn't planning to stop her. I was planning to let her speak, so that when I finally showed her what I already knew, she'd hear the sound of her own lies echo back at her. And I'd be the one standing there, listening. The morning after the party felt strange. The apartment looked too clean, like someone had tried to erase all traces of what happened. Isabel's jacket still hung by the door, her perfume lingered faintly in the hallway, and for a few seconds, I could almost convince myself that last night had been a dream. But the image of her phone screen came back every time I blinked. I spent half the morning walking circles around the living room, checking the time, pretending to scroll through emails. She finally showed up around noon. Her knock wasn't timid this time. It was urgent, rhythmic, a kind of performance meant to sound desperate. I opened the door, and there she was. Hair done, makeup perfect, face rehearsed into what she probably thought looked remorseful. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited, talking before I could answer. She said the message was a joke, that someone had sent it to mess with her. She claimed she had no idea who it was. She made coffee, sat on the counter like nothing was wrong, and tried to talk about random things. Work, Harper's party, plans for the week. It was surreal, watching her act like nothing had shattered. I didn't argue. I just watched her. People who are telling the truth don't need to fill silence. They let it breathe. But she couldn't. Every pause was another chance for guilt to crawl up her throat, and she fought it with more words. Then her purse tipped off the counter. The contents scattered across the floor, lipstick, receipts, her phone, a small hotel keycard. It landed face up on the tile. Room 212. She froze. I didn't even need to say anything. Her eyes darted to mine, then to the card, then back again. She reached for it slowly, mumbling something about it being from a friend's birthday, but her voice cracked. The lie didn't even try to sound believable. I picked up the card before she could. She started to cry, not out of sadness, but out of panic. I told her to grab her things. We were going for a drive. She kept asking where, but I didn't answer. The entire way to the hotel, she tried to explain. She said she'd stayed there with a group after the fight, that she couldn't go home because she'd been drinking. She said she was scared to tell me because I'd get the wrong idea. The words piled up like wet sand. Useless, collapsing the second she stopped talking. The hotel was one of those mid-range chains near the interstate. Nothing fancy, but too expensive to call ordinary. We parked, walked in through the automatic doors, and she looked like she was walking toward a firing squad. I told the receptionist I'd left something in room 212 last night. The woman at the desk smiled, polite, unknowing, and said the room had already been checked out. Then she looked down at her screen and said the reservation was under Troy Bennett. I felt Isabel's breath hitch beside me. She tried to step forward, but I held up a hand. The receptionist, still unaware, kept talking, said Mr. Bennett had left early that morning. I thanked her, turned around, and walked straight out. Isabel followed, whispering half-sentences that didn't make sense. Outside, she finally broke. She admitted it had happened once, claimed it meant nothing, that it was a mistake. She said we'd been arguing too much, that she'd been lonely, that I was distant. There's a strange calm that comes over you when someone tries to justify betrayal in real time. It's like watching a car accident from far away. You know there's damage, but you can't feel the impact anymore. I didn't yell. I didn't even respond. I just walked to the car, started it, and waited for her to stop crying before saying she needed to get out. She didn't move for a while. When she finally did, she stood on the curb, shaking, watching me drive away like she couldn't believe I was really doing it. The next few days passed like fog. She called constantly. I ignored her. Harper texted once, saying Isabel had told everyone we were taking a short break. That phrasing made my stomach turn. It sounded rehearsed, as if she'd said it before to other people, maybe other boyfriends. Then one night, a message appeared in my inbox from someone I didn't recognize. It was from Troy Bennett. He started by apologizing. He said he hadn't known she was engaged, that she told him she was single and recently out of a long relationship. He said she'd come to his office for a work thing a few weeks back, and things just happened. The phrasing was familiar. People always use that word when they don't want to face what they've done. But the real punch came at the end. He mentioned that he wasn't the only one. He said she'd been seeing another man from her office months before him, someone named David Holt. He attached screenshots of messages she'd sent to David, still saved on his phone because, as he put it, you should know the kind of person she is. The screenshots were real. The tone, the phrasing, the way she wrote, it was all unmistakably her. In one of them, she mentioned being at his place while I was working late again. I scrolled through them until I reached one that made me drop the phone. It was a photo she'd taken from a balcony, smiling, a city view behind her. And in the reflection of the glass door, barely visible, stood David. I recognized him from a company dinner we'd attended months earlier. She'd introduced him to me as the project manager with the awful haircut. I stared at that image for a long time, the details burning into me. The shape of her smile. The same necklace I'd bought her for our anniversary. The way her hair covered the side of her face just enough to look perfect in photos but hide the truth underneath. When the anger finally came, it wasn't loud. It was surgical. Every memory, every conversation, every moment we'd shared suddenly looked different, like someone had turned on the lights in a theater and revealed the props were cardboard. She texted again the next day, saying she wanted to talk in person, that she owed me honesty. I told her to meet me Saturday night for dinner at the restaurant where I'd proposed 6 months ago. She agreed instantly, probably thinking it meant I was willing to forgive her. What she didn't know was that I wasn't looking for closure. I wanted to see if she could still lie when every lie was already cornered. I wanted to hear the story she'd build out of the ashes. By Saturday, I had everything I needed, the screenshots, the hotel record, the photo of her car. But most importantly, I had silence. The kind that makes people like her crumble. When I looked in the mirror before leaving, I didn't see heartbreak. I saw something colder, quieter. Someone who'd finally stopped believing that love could excuse everything. And when I walked out that door, I wasn't going to dinner to listen. I was going to watch the truth fall apart in front of the person who built it. By Saturday, I'd reached a level of calm that didn't feel natural. It was the kind of calm people mistake for forgiveness. I decided I wouldn't yell, accuse, or demand. I wanted to let her talk herself into a corner and watch it happen in real time. The restaurant was one of those places built for photographs, dim lighting, white tablecloths, a pianist who played the same 3 songs in rotation. Isabel loved it. She had chosen it for the night I'd proposed half a year earlier. Now she was walking toward me again through the same doorway, smiling like the past week hadn't happened. She looked perfect, of course. New dress, subtle makeup, calm expression. But her eyes betrayed her. They were restless, darting around like she was afraid the walls might start whispering her secrets. She sat down and started talking about how she'd reflected on things, how she understood my pain and wanted to rebuild what we had. Her voice carried that soft, steady rhythm of someone performing remorse instead of feeling it. I let her go on. She talked about the future, about therapy, about taking time to rebuild trust. I nodded when appropriate, sipped my drink, and said little. People underestimate silence. When you stay quiet long enough, liars begin to hear their own voices echo and start adding details that undo them. She said she'd deleted every contact that could make me uncomfortable. Then she mentioned Troy by name, claiming she'd told him to leave her alone. I asked how she'd managed that since he'd supposedly been a mistake. She hesitated, then said he'd reached out to apologize. It wasn't even a good lie, but she said it like a line rehearsed in front of a mirror. The waiter came by, refilling our glasses. I'd already asked him earlier to leave the phone I'd given him on a small shelf behind the wine bottle. It was recording. I wanted everything captured, not for revenge, not even for proof, but because I needed to hear later how easily she lied. She kept spinning stories, shifting blame, claiming I'd grown distant, that she'd been confused. She talked about loneliness like it was a disease she'd caught by accident. Then, halfway through, I slid my phone across the table. I'd spent the previous night recovering deleted messages from her cloud backups. It hadn't been difficult. Most people never realize how easily everything syncs. The phone screen lit up, showing the thread of her conversation with Troy, complete with the message that started it all. Miss you already. Last night was perfect. Then came more messages, voice notes, photos she'd said she'd deleted. Her face drained of color as she stared. The quiet between us became heavy enough to feel like gravity. She tried to reach for the phone, but I pulled it back. Her voice trembled now, The performance was cracking. She said it was taken out of context. That phrase hit me like a joke told at the wrong funeral. Then came the shift, the sudden panic, the desperate reaching for control. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and said she couldn't do this here. She turned toward the exit and froze. Standing near the entrance, waiting for the hostess, was Troy Bennett. I'd invited him. He wasn't dressed for a date, just jeans and a jacket, confusion on his face as he noticed us. I'd told him I wanted to talk about clearing the air, that maybe Isabel and I were getting married again and he should hear my side first. Now he saw her standing there, wide-eyed, caught between guilt and fury. For a few seconds, none of us moved. The restaurant noise faded into background static. Isabel's lips parted, but no sound came out. Troy looked from her to me, realization dawning. He muttered something under his breath, something about not knowing, and stepped closer, keeping his distance, but making sure everyone nearby could hear. He said she'd told him she was single. He said he tried to end it when he found out she was engaged, but she'd called him, saying I was abusive and she needed a safe place. I watched the guests at nearby tables go quiet. The pianist stopped mid-song. Isabel shook her head violently, denying it all, but the words came too late. The room had already turned. People were staring, whispering. The waiter froze in the corner, still holding a tray of drinks. I stood, left money on the table, and told her I wouldn't be continuing dinner. As I walked past, she grabbed my wrist, begging me not to leave like this. Her nails dug into my skin. Her voice cracked between pleading and rage, switching tones every few seconds as if she was trying to find the one that would work. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I no longer recognized the woman in front of me. The one I'd loved had been a version of her she'd invented, a shape she could wear when it suited her. This one, the desperate and cornered version, was closer to the truth. I pried her hand off mine, told her the waiter had been recording, and walked out. The moment I stepped outside, the noise hit me again, the city, the traffic, the hum of people living lives untouched by mine. I stood on the curb for a minute, breathing in cold air that felt cleaner than it had in days. Then I heard her behind me again. She'd followed me out, crying, shouting that she could fix it, that she'd make it right. I turned and handed her a thin folder from my jacket. Inside were copies of her unpaid credit card bills, balances I'd been covering for months, and a printed draft of our prenup, the one she'd begged me not to file yet because it killed the romance. I told her to take them, that I wouldn't be renewing the lease on our apartment, and that she had 30 days to figure out where to live. She stared at me, blinking as if the words didn't register. Then she opened the folder, saw the numbers, and realized how much I'd quietly supported her. The irony hit her too late. She'd built her comfort on the same man she'd been trying to replace. When she spoke again, her tone shifted. No more tears, just cold calculation. She said I was overreacting, that everyone makes mistakes. She said if I exposed her, I'd look vindictive. I told her she'd done that part herself. As I walked away, I could hear her voice fading behind me, rising again as she started yelling my name. But I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I knew that behind me, the restaurant full of witnesses was already piecing the story together in whispers, 100 different versions that all ended the same way, with her reputation collapsing faster than she could rebuild it. When I reached my car, I sat for a long moment before starting the engine. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not because I'd won, but because there was nothing left to lose. The engagement was over. The lies were finished. The next step wasn't revenge, it was erasure. She'd already done the destroying. I just had to make sure there was nothing of mine left for her to ruin. That night, I deleted every photo, every message, every trace of her from my phone. Then I sat back, watching the screen go blank. It wasn't closure. It was something quieter, colder, and far more permanent. The following days passed like a slow implosion. I didn't hear from Isabel directly at first, just whispers that drifted back through mutual friends. Harper messaged me saying she'd heard something went down at the restaurant. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound petty. But within 48 hours, the entire friend group knew what had happened. Someone had recorded part of the confrontation between Isabel and Troy. It circulated online under the title, "Engagement Party Gone Wrong." At first, I didn't even watch it. But when it appeared on my feed, I couldn't help myself. The video was shaky, but the sound was clear. Isabel's voice trembled as she tried to talk her way out of it, while I stood motionless in the background. Her tone switched from pleading to defensive to hysterical in less than a minute. That clip spread fast, not viral, but far enough that people from her company started to see it. By Monday, her boss had called it temporary leave for her to deal with personal matters. That was the official phrasing. The unofficial story was uglier. Someone in the office group chat leaked screenshots from her texts with David Holt, the coworker she'd been seeing before Troy. They had apparently resurfaced on an old shared drive that wasn't properly cleaned out. The overlap between professional and personal worlds hit her hard. She tried calling me again, this time from a different number. I didn't answer. The messages kept coming, alternating between apologies and threats. One morning she said she loved me, that she'd lost everything and just wanted to talk. That night, she said she'd make sure people knew the full story. Her version of the full story, of course, painted me as controlling, manipulative, and emotionally cruel. I didn't defend myself publicly. I didn't have to. People had already seen the footage. They'd heard her admit enough to destroy her own defense. Then came the financial fallout. Our joint credit cards were still active. I checked the statements and found a few $1,000s in charges from months back. Hotel stays, spa bookings, dinners for two, all made under my name. I forwarded the evidence to the bank and explained the situation. They reversed the charges after confirming her signature on receipts didn't match mine. She ended up with a flagged account and a call from collections. By midweek, she showed up at the apartment. I'd already packed my things and moved most of them to storage. When she knocked, I didn't open the door. I stood behind it, listening as she spoke through the wood. Her tone was calm now, tired, almost rehearsed. She said she was losing her job, her parents were furious, and she had nowhere to go. She said she'd learned her lesson. I told her through the door that I'd already transferred the lease into her name and paid the next month's rent. After that, it was hers to handle. There was silence on the other side for a long time, then a soft laugh, strange, bitter, the sound of someone who realizes the game is really over. When I looked out the window later, she was sitting on the curb outside with her head in her hands. The sight didn't make me feel triumphant. It didn't make me feel anything. There's a kind of numbness that comes after long betrayal, a place where emotions burn out and you're left with quiet observation. That's where I was. The next morning, Harper texted again. She said Isabel's family had called her, asking if I'd be willing to talk and help her get back on her feet. I laughed when I read it. They had treated me like a son for years, and now they were trying to manage the wreckage like it was some kind of PR issue. I ignored the message. A week later, a new message appeared in my inbox, from Troy. He said Isabel had tried contacting him again, first apologizing, then threatening him for ruining her life. He said she'd sent him screenshots of a fake conversation she'd edited to make it look like I'd harassed her. He didn't take the bait. He blocked her number and forwarded the screenshots to me. I kept them, not for revenge, but as a reminder of how far she was willing to sink. Around the same time, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. It was from Isabel's sister, Natalie. She apologized for contacting me, but said she thought I should know something. Isabel had borrowed her ID months ago, supposedly to pick up a hotel reservation for a friend. Natalie hadn't thought much of it until recently, when she learned that Isabel had used it to check into the same hotel where I'd seen her car parked. Apparently, Isabel had been banned under her real name after an incident involving an unpaid bill and property damage. She'd used her sister's ID to keep seeing the same man. The level of deceit no longer shocked me. It only confirmed what I already understood. There had never been one single act of betrayal, just an ongoing performance I'd been too blind to see through. I sent the information from Natalie to the bank, attaching the evidence of unauthorized use. The case closed within days, and the charges were permanently reversed. Isabel's account was frozen pending investigation. When I finally watched the city lights from my new apartment, smaller, quieter, on the other side of town, I realized I hadn't thought about her for hours. That was progress. The noise, the chaos, the obsession with understanding why, all of it had started to fade. What replaced it wasn't joy. It was something closer to clarity. A few weeks later, I received one last message from her. The subject line read closure. The body of the email was long, almost a confession, but not quite. She blamed stress, loneliness, pressure. She said I'd made her feel invisible. She said I'd destroyed her reputation when I could have saved it. There was no real apology, just justification wrapped in self-pity. I didn't reply. I sat there reading it twice, then clicked delete. No archive, no screenshot. Just gone. People talk about revenge like it's a moment, a confrontation, a line you say that ends the story. But the real revenge is quieter. It's living well after the other person's life caves in on itself. It's walking through your day without the weight they left behind. In the months that followed, I rebuilt. I started freelancing again, moved closer to my office, and stopped avoiding mutual friends. Every now and then, someone would mention Isabel in passing, how she'd moved out of town, how she was trying to start over. The story always came with a tone of disbelief, like no one could quite decide whether to pity her or despise her. For me, she simply stopped existing. She became something like an old scar, visible under certain light, but without pain. The final twist came unexpectedly. One afternoon, I got a message from David Holt, the coworker she'd been with before Troy. He said Isabel had reached out to him recently, trying to rekindle things. He declined, said he'd moved on, but mentioned something that made me pause. She'd started working part-time for a small marketing firm owned by Troy's ex-girlfriend. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. It turned out Isabel had walked straight into another circle of people who knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. Within a month, she was gone from that job too. That was the last I ever heard of her. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the party where it all started. The music, the laughter, the moment her phone lit up on the counter. I realize now that message didn't just expose her, it freed me. It stripped the illusion down to its bones and left me standing in front of the truth. People say heartbreak changes you. I think it just removes whatever was never real to begin with. When I locked the door to that apartment for the last time, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Isabel had already taught me everything I needed to know about what love isn't. And sometimes, that's the only closure you'll ever need.